Hi, Kay. Thanks for giving the opening remarks. Have you already introduced Tom? Because we could not hear you.
Yes, we have already introduced and we are already ready for to listen to
Okay.
keynote. So please start, Paul. Thank you.
Eh, Yeah. Hi, Tom. Then we will pass the word to you.
Okay, I am ready. First of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited because I've never presented to a group in China before, and I, I actually don't hear much from readers in China either. So this is a great opportunity, and it just came last week. I'm filling in for another speaker who couldn't make it. And when Elisa reached out to me, she said, "Hey, would you mind speaking on this post you wrote called 'What is the technical writer's role in content marketing?'" This is a screenshot of my blog. I'd rather be writing in case you've not seen it before. But this post is really interesting to me because there's a bit of a backstory that I never really shared on my blog. Back in 2016, so about 5 years ago, I was thinking about like making a career pivot. I always felt that maybe I was in the wrong role. I love to write on my blog and I didn't see many other tech comm bloggers. So I thought maybe I should be more in developer marketing. Maybe this role would suit me because I love to create content and I want more narrative forms and so on. And I started thinking about this and I thought, oh, I found this perfect position. It was at this API company that needed a content marketer. Um, and so I wrote this post that was trying to argue that the technical writer and the technical writer's background, their knowledge, their kind of their mindset makes a perfect fit for somebody to create developer marketing content. It's a perfect fit for somebody who can really communicate and speak with the developer audience. And so I wrote this post trying to make this argument that what makes the best marketer? A technical writer, because the technical writer is familiar with the user's pain points. The technical writer knows what issues and challenges the developer has on a technical level. You know, a lot of times marketing that doesn't really get into the technical details or doesn't really understand all the technical challenges can kind of feel empty. Well, as I was kind of making this decision, should I pivot in this direction or should I stay as a technical writer? I decided, you know what, I like technical writing. I'm going to stay in this route. But I instead applied at a different job. This is when I was going to work for Amazon. And it just so happens that during the interview, the senior interviewer, the last person in the interviewing chain, he sits down and he says, you know, Tom, that post you wrote about, you know, the technical writer's role in content marketing, I felt like you just got it. Like you really understood like how it all should fit together, which surprised me because I didn't even write this post thinking I wanted, you know, to sell my skills for Amazon as in this marketing bridge type role. Let me share just a brief little excerpt from the post just to give you a sample of kind of what this is, because this will lay the foundation for this whole talk. If you're trying to win over a technical audience, you need to communicate with them on a technical level. You need to understand the technical issues they face and talk with credibility about those issues. I'm not saying that content marketing should consist of verbatim topics from a user manual, but the concepts that you cover in tech docs could certainly be repurposed into larger, more conceptual articles that address strategies around those topics. For example, a topic in a user guide on generating an HMAC signature for requests might be repurposed into an article on HMAC authentication for APIs, in contrast to other authentication protocols such as OAuth. As a technical writer, you have the insight to provide substantial information-rich content that will build relationships with technical audiences. Marketing writing without substance is going to come across as empty marketing, the kind of brochure or product literature that has such a strong agenda that it's almost unreadable. Now, as technical
Hey, Tom.
writers, yes.
Just one more remark. Would you mind to share your screen?
Oh, I haven't been sharing my screen. I'm sorry. Okay, give me a second here. Major omission there. Okay. Oh,
Right.
my bad. Okay, there we go. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, do you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, sorry about that. You really didn't miss much here. I just had this one slide. This is the just screenshot of the post. What's the technical writer's role in content marketing? And the title slide. The focus on this talk, Tech Comm and Marketing, how to make your Tech Comm group more visible within your company. All right, so I was just reading this little excerpt showing how technical writers really have the background, the understanding to kind of make a compelling case for somebody who would write developer marketing content that would connect with users. All right, and the idea of content marketing, I'm no expert really. I mean, people think of me as like an API documentation person, not a content marketing person. So this is really veering into an area that I'm not an expert in. But the idea of content marketing is that rather than just pitching products and services to users that you want them to buy, instead you build a relationship with them by giving them valuable content. There's no like sales agenda. You're just trying to give them content that they enjoy. Think of like a catalog that has a lot of good articles in it. It's not just like a catalog of products that people can buy. And the reason that documentation people make such a great fit for this is because when we write documentation, we're not trying to sell anybody anything. Documentation teaches you something, right? So if your primary value is, hey, I'm teaching you these things that are complicated and making it easy for you, then that's a great fit for content marketing content. It gives you perfect fodder for this whole relationship that you're trying to build. So while I was at Amazon, I actually was in a group that was half developer marketing and half technical writers. It was a perfect blend of the two. And I thought this is my ideal chance to experiment in this direction to see if I can make a go at pivoting from documentation into more of like a content marketer type writer and create articles for our blog and for the other assets that would engage with our users. Users were developers who were making apps for Fire TV and so on and other Amazon devices. Now, there's one more aspect to this that I think is crucial and one that I've always tried to follow in any kind of content that I write, and that is to give it a foundation of story. This is a screenshot from The User's Journey, Story Mapping Products That People Love by Donna LeChow. And she draws the basic story arc that is so common. You start with a current state. There's some kind of problem or trigger that causes frustration or pain to the user, right? The user takes some steps. They cross over some impediments, some hurdles. They finally solve the problem. They have delight. And they meet the goals. And she gives the example of the iPhone when it was first released. Think back to whatever it was, 2000 something, before the iPhone. And the people had to come up with a story to sell the iPhone. And the basic story was, well, previously you had like a phone and you had a computer and you had I don't even know what the third device was. You sent texts, right? And so now you have a device that combines all three of these functions into one, and it makes life so much more seamless and integrated. And so that was their storytelling behind their product. I think that any kind of content marketing approach would be based on some kind of corporate storytelling where you're basically starting out with, hey, this is some problem, and our product is solving this problem and providing lots of delight, which sounds great. I was like, I've got the formula, I've got the capability, and I've got the opportunity. I'm in a perfect position to write this kind of content. However, as I kind of took my first steps in this direction, I quickly realized that things were not going to go how I thought. there was a major issue that we were trying to address with apps for Fire TV. They were inconsistent in a particular way. Some apps had a feature integrated. Other apps didn't have this feature integrated. And we really were trying to make a push to get all developers to integrate this feature so that the user experience, the people who are using the Fire TV, wouldn't have unpredictability from one app to the next, but they could just go into their Fire TV, start one app, have that feature available, go into another app, the feature would be there too, and they could have, more consistency. So I started out this post describing the problem, because this is the fundamental way that stories are told. And then I launched into the solution, which was a technical explanation of how to implement the feature. And I thought, this is perfect. But when I submitted it to our marketing manager there, she basically stripped out all the conflict at the beginning. We didn't want to communicate that there was some kind of problem with the user experience, that anything was inconsistent. Instead, she said, let's just start right at the technical how-to on how to implement the feature. And I thought, wow, that really cuts the heart out of this post. It's now almost redundant with the documentation. This same sort of story happened with several other attempts as well. I would try to identify something that I thought was a user pain point or some issue, and then kind of move towards a technical solution. And in this same example, the issue that I identified or whatever the conflict was basically cut out of the post. So after a few experiences like this, I lost interest in going towards this direction. And I felt that, like, in the marketing domain, they don't want to have any kind of conflict or issue. And without that, you can't have story. So without story, you can't have engagement, and there's really no point to it. It was, in some ways it was good because it kept me rooted in the technical writing domain, but it gave me a lot of food for thought. And this was really reinforced, this whole dichotomy of like conflict versus no conflict, corporate versus independent, was reinforced with a recent release that I was watching. Amazon came out with like a new Fire TV stick. And I've got two screenshots here. On the left, you have this Amazon Fire TV news blog that's talking about this new device. And on the right, you have the Amazon App Store blog that is also talking about the new device. And if you read them, if you go in to see like the independents, this is an independent person and their take on it, it's much more in depth. They even list all the specs, which is pretty amazing. But they really gets into the nitty gritty of every aspect, gets into every detail in depth. You can see he's got a lot to say, and he's actually very expert at this. And there are 72 comments on this post. In contrast, if you go into the official like corporate posts about it, it's much skimpier. It's basically marketing material followed by a link to tech specs. There's really no substance. Whereas again, if you come back to the independent voice, he can begin by saying, the storage on the device being only 8 gigabytes kind of sucks, but he's got a lot of other positive things to say, and then he analyzes it. Well, I think we've been watching blogs enough to come to the conclusion that independent voices, independent blogs are much more interesting than corporate blogs. I've yet to sort of be engaged by any corporate blog, and I think it's for the same reason that I've been describing. Corporations, marketing, they don't really want to hit controversy or other friction head on. They're much happier to kind of stay in the happy path, where things are smiles and happy faces all around. Interestingly, a little bit of backstory about this, the same author who writes Amazon Fire TV News went to work for Amazon for a couple of years. He took a break from his blog, super popular on this blog, took a break, went to work for Amazon, and while working at Amazon, he discontinued the blog. He put it on pause for a couple of years. or maybe a year while he was there because he felt it was a conflict of interest. He makes money from people clicking links for ad revenue or something. But for sure, he didn't have that same voice. And then when he left Amazon, he returned to the blog and fired it up again, and he had the same kind of engagement as before. There's just something about being an independent that allows you to go much more in depth and be analytical. Even if you're not, telling stories, you can be much more analytical in ways that you really can't in the corporate domain. So based on this, my conclusion was that approved marketing content essentially consists of announcements and tech tips. That's about all you can say. Like, here's a new product, here's some tech resources and tutorials, here's a new sample app or something. And as such, this content is sort of watered down. It's no better than documentation. So why not just focus on the documentation itself and let marketers or whomever, support, business development, training, just share direct links to the docs. And I think in some of the newsletters that I subscribe to, for example, this one from Stripe, they send out like a developer digest that is pretty much just a list of links to tech resources. It's like, hey, we've got a new tutorial, or we've got a new release, we've got a new feature, we've got some new articles, but by and large, it's not going to be that same independent voice as before. So that was my experience with content marketing. It sort of led me back to documentation because as a blogger, I like to address real issues. I like to talk transparently. I like to speak plainly. I don't like to hide anything. It's part of the core identity of who I am. And when I was in that marketing space, I felt like my hands were tied behind my back and we couldn't address issues. But you can in documentation because, honestly, people see the documentation domain as an area for troubleshooting, for solving problems, for dealing with issues. Whereas the marketing domain is seen more as like the happy announcement, happy path kind of space where that kind of thing doesn't exist. As I was thinking about documentation, I started to realize that all these groups within a company use documentation. If you think about like these groups that are interacting with users, documentation is a tool that is essential to their job. Think about support. They're going to link to tech docs all the time as a way to provide a solution. Or marketing. They link at least to the technical specifications of a new device, right? Solutions architects who are describing how to implement something are going to freely use documentation and rely on it. Training, even UX design needs documentation to understand how to design the right flows for tasks within some kind of developer product. Product evangelists giving a webinar, they may have a tutorial in their webinar, but they need some kind of written documentation to give users as well. Internal engineers use documentation to kind of ramp up on their role, at least initially as they're onboarding. And of course, end users use it as one of the primary audiences. So documentation is this lifeblood of a company that's used by so many different groups. I don't think one could say that any deliverable from another group is used in such a ubiquitous way. You couldn't draw intersecting lines through everything that marketing produces, for example, or that product evangelists produce. But documentation is a tool that is common and central among all of these different groups. And so if documentation is so central, then how can we allow these groups that are using the content to use it more seamlessly? This is getting to the idea of enterprise content strategy or content strategy, where you have a central documentation resource that other people access and leverage for whatever deliverables they're creating, right? It's like you've got one resource that is used across groups. The opposite of a content strategy is content silos, where everybody just does their own thing. Like, marketing, let's say they just don't even rely on docs. They create their own tech specs. They don't even interact or training or support, just duplicates their own content. There's no reuse across lines at all. And just laying one more detail here, and then I'm going to bring this together a little more. When we talk about single sourcing, there's a couple of different types of single sourcing. There's the single sourcing where you take the same content and you output different formats, like you output a PDF file and a web help and a Kindle version or something, right? You're taking the same content, you're just packaging it differently in a different format. But then there's a slightly different, or not a slightly different, a really different approach to single sourcing where you have the same content in different deliverables. You take documentation and put it into an ebook. You take and you put it into video training scripts or a knowledge base or a blog post. You take documentation and put it into product briefs or pitch decks, right? This is where the whole enterprise content strategy is really strained because these other formats are different. I remember one time I was working for a startup and the PM was creating a product brief, which was like a 2-page high-level overview of the product intended for an executive. And as we were talking, I was like, well, I already have an overview in the documentation for the product. Shouldn't they be the same? Can't we just reuse this content into your product brief? And so as we set about this, I realized that his product brief was written in a third-person point of view. In other words, the partner was described as a third person, whereas all the documentation was written in a second person point of view, talking directly to the partner as you. And this simple change in point of view was a deal breaker for reusing the content. As much as I tried to remove points of view, it was not really possible. And by the end, the product manager wanted the content to be more suitable for an executive than an integrator or a developer. And that also put a strain on the content. I think if you were to go through each of these different types of content, like a pitch deck, for example, this is just a slide deck that you try to attract new partners with. They are far more visual than documentation ever is. If you have a knowledge base, you might think, oh, this is perfect. But as soon as you get knowledge into those things, it's very hard to keep it in sync elsewhere. And so you create a host of other problems. Video training is another very difficult thing. You might think, oh, I've already got tasks written out and I'm just going to put them into scripts and then people make videos out of them. Except for video scripts need to be much more conversational and written in a different way than documentation. So, pushing this content out to all these groups that need it in the deliverables that they need is not in any way straightforward. And in some ways, it just doesn't work. I think there are at least a couple different paradigms to look at here. There's duplicating from a single source, which is this attempt at content strategy where you take this reusable content, you push it into an ebook or you push it into a white paper or whatever you have. There's another approach of just pointing to a single source, right? Why duplicate content? Why not just tell people, hey, this is where the content lives. This is our single source of truth for the content. And we're going to bring people to it. For example, let's say that you have some instructions for integrating a code library to enable an API. Like, here's how you get this thing integrated. Well, no doubt you would want that topic to appear at least in a couple of places. In a topic on installing the product, how do you get this thing integrated, as well as a getting started tutorial that might have users take a couple of first steps that would no doubt involve integrating this library to use the API. Rather than duplicate that content and create two instances of it, even within documentation, it's just as simple to create a link and point users to that source. A getting started tutorial will often have a single step that says complete all the tasks in this introductory topic section, So, I'm coming back to this idea that documentation is this single source of truth that fuels and empowers so many other groups. And the attempt to try to like duplicate documentation and push it out and incorporate it into their deliverables might not work so much. It might just be better to have a single source that people can draw from as needed and adapt in ways that don't necessarily duplicate it, but that point back to it. All right, now I'm kind of moving towards this other part of marketing, which is where I've become much more at peace with, and that's visibility. I think that if documentation is going to be this resource that empowers so many other groups within a company, technical writers have to do a much better job at making documentation visible to these other groups. I think in general, technical writers are terrible at marketing docs. When we write something, I think our nature is, I'm going to put a little line in a release note and publish that. And if people want to know, they can just check out the release notes. Well, that doesn't really work very well in terms of keeping people aware and updated. A lot of people inside a company, they're not checking out your release notes on a daily basis. What we need to do is proactively kind of let these groups know what's new in docs. And once they're aware of docs, then they're much more likely to use them in their materials rather than duplicating them. They're much more likely to reference them, and they're more likely to give you input that adds to them. If I were to point to one thing that I have learned as a blogger and been doing, I've had my blog since 2006, and I've come to the conclusion that a blog is like the best way to increase your visibility, and it's a super simple formula. If you want to increase your visibility, you start with a focus and you multiply content by sharing it. Or in other words, focus times content times sharing. You write something, you keep it focused on a specific topic, and then you share that and you repeat it infinitely. On my blog, I write a lot about topics in technical communication. That's my focus. And I try to write a post a week or something and share that out across LinkedIn, Twitter, and an email newsletter. In fact, the email newsletter is one of the most overlooked forms of outreach. I get way more people clicking on links when I send out a newsletter than I do on social media like Twitter or LinkedIn. But in general, this is all visibility is. You write and you share. You write and you share. You write and you share, or you create whatever it is you're doing and you share that out. And pretty soon, people know you. They see you. They understand what you do and what docs are available and the story behind it. So what I've been doing for the last several, or at least couple of years, is creating something called a documentation report. This documentation report has sections like, here's a purpose and intro, a little bit about our team, where we publish. Then I list all the docs we recently published, upcoming doc work, maybe efforts to reduce tickets and so on. I add some info about metrics, how many people are hitting the docs. I talk about maybe some strategic initiatives. I end with how to request docs. These reports are a lot of fun to write. And in all my career as a tech writer, I don't see many people creating these reports. This is a super simple way to build visibility for your documentation, for your group, for your role, in ways that resonates with other people. I recommend doing this at about a monthly cadence. It's nice to just take time to sit down and reflect on all these strategies and how the docs are doing, and to sort of give an account of, hey, you're paying me as a technical writer. Here's what I've created. People, especially business leaders, they like that. It informs their strategy, their direction. I actually added a whole section of this in my API doc course. In case you haven't seen it, I'd rather be writing.com/learn API doc on sending doc reports, doc status reports. builds visibility and relationships. It's really the same thing that I've been doing as a blogger in the community. Instead of writing content and sharing it on a blog, I just share content in an email report to some lists. And in some ways, the doc report is much easier because you don't have to try to grow your list. You just look to see what other reports are coming by and what lists they're using, and just start throwing documentation reports across the same lists. People in companies, they already expect to be included and informed and automatically subscribed to certain reports. These are also fun to write. I was, especially the metrics one, the metrics section. Every month I sit down and I look at our metrics and I try to derive some kind of insight from them. And it's always a challenge. I'm like, how do our page views compare to page views of similar products? Or, what are our most popular pages and why? And how does that align with the new partners that we have? Or why is it that our number of users has grown threefold over 2 years? I mean, it gives you an opportunity to kind of analyze and dissect things in ways that I find enjoyable. It's not just your humdrum document this widget sort of task. This is more analytical, more intellectual, more conversational. You tell the story behind a topic or a documentation project that you wrote. For example, I recently finished 2 milestones that I've been wanting to finish at my current work. And one was to create product overviews that were rich in detail for 2 core products, and also to create getting started tutorials for each product, which were completely missing. And in this next documentation report that I'm going to write, I'm going to tell a little bit about the story behind this, why I think getting started tutorials are so important, how we went about it, the success rate, the sort of indirect benefits of allowing tech writers to test things that they couldn't previously, and invite people to try them out. Now, when you send these doc reports, which can be as long as you want, really, these could be 2,000 words, they can be 200 words, really. It's almost for your benefit more than others sometimes to have this reflection. But when you send them out, you can expect lots of good things to happen. You can expect that people will become aware of you that maybe did not before. People will reach out to you and say, hey, I got a question about this doc, or hey, is this on your roadmap? And maybe you didn't even interact with that person previously, and suddenly they know who you are. That's kind of the story of my blog as well. Like, I go to a conference, people come up to me and they're like, oh, hey, Tom. And they know me because they've either heard a podcast or read something. I don't know them. It's the same within your company. People suddenly feel like they'll start to know you, but it's this parasymmetric relationship where you don't necessarily know them. But senior leaders love this kind of stuff. They love to get reports. They feel like it helps them like take strategic direction, and it helps them know that, hey, docs are on track. A lot of times people will reach out and say, hey, is this on your radar? This huge project that like we're going to be releasing in a month. Hopefully that doesn't happen so often, but it's happened before. And I'm like, oh yeah, there's a gap. So you're sort of lubricating these communication lines and making these groups aware of the documentation so that they'll use it. And the more that they use it, the more feedback you get. And this can create an upward spiral. They start to use the documentation more regularly and give you input, which then, if you act on it, can improve the documentation and make it more used as well, or used even more. I really like this graphic, by the way. I once sent this out as a tweet and got like 70 likes. People love it because it really does show that documentation is at the core of so many different activities. And that's why content strategy and how these other groups leverage the content is so essential. All right. So I'm kind of winding down here, and let me just make a summary. I can see it doesn't all quite fit on this slide, but Basically, my points have been this. Tech writers might not have much success writing engaging marketing content because marketing strips out conflict. Now, that was just my experience, and I feel like it's probably similar to others, but again, take it with a grain of salt. This is Tom's perspective. If you want to address real issues, you're better off staying within the documentation domain. Because in the documentation, you can be raw and honest for the most part. You're allowed greater latitude to kind of address the warts of a product, especially in developer docs. You're sort of allowed to say, hey, the system breaks if you do this. Be careful. Documentation is useful to groups across the company, but the difference in deliverable styles and conventions means that single sourcing the documentation into all these other deliverables is unlikely. I think it's better to point users to a single instance of the docs. And let's see if I can get the other stuff in here. No. Oh, well, okay. For docs to be useful across these groups, you need a strategy for increasing their awareness of the docs. And that strategy, in my experience, is sending that monthly documentation report. It helps build awareness of the relationship. It helps build awareness and helps build relationships that you need to be successful. You can't be successful as a tech writer if people don't know you, if you stay in the shadows, if you're so introverted that you never tell people what you've done. That just doesn't work. You have to kind of get out of your shell and use your writing talents to communicate in email. You don't have to give presentations or speak up in meetings. Just create a report and send it to everybody and their cousin. And finally, the more awareness you create around docs, the more feedback and input you get, and you can leverage this input to make docs even more helpful to these groups and create that upward spiral of content improvement. All right, so that's pretty much all I had to say about this topic. Again, this is not my usual topic that I address, but I've been thinking about this story for a while, my foray into marketing and my experiences and where I sort of landed. I do want to acknowledge that I think people's experiences will vary by company, by domain. I'm working in developer documentation. I was in Silicon Valley for many years there, about 8 years. Now I'm in Seattle. But I think a person's experience will be quite different if they're working in, say, hardware documentation, or if they have a bunch of print deliverables, or if they're dealing heavily with localization. There's a lot of differences between API docs, developer docs, end user docs, machinery, non-machinery software, and so on. But in my experience, this is what's really been true. So now let's open it up for questions and more conversation. Feel free to speak your question or to write it in the chat. I'd be happy to address anything.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you for your great speech, which showcased a very good way to kill two birds with one stone, to raise your visibility and your efficiency through sales marketing. And I also, from your speech, I see that you show a very good practice of working technical communication and marketing communication through the strategic content marketing. So now comes the Q&A session. Anyone interested to these questions? Okay. Thank you. Hi, Tom. Hi, Laura. I'm so excited to have this chance to talk to you, though not in person. And I have several questions. Actually, I'm a fan of you. I have read your blog about especially the API docs, because I was working on the API doc project last year, and I'm gonna share about this project this year. And I referred to your blog actually in my slides, and so excited. So first of all, I'd like to ask you about because I have read your resume, for your information on the LinkedIn, and you have worked in Amazon and now in Google. And I want to know the corporate structure of technical writing in these two companies. That is, for example, whether the technical writer team is affiliated to the product team or you're a totally separate team. And the second question is, what are the challenges your team is facing now? For example, are you challenged by the other teams about your values, right? Because just now you mentioned about you have made a lot of job reports, and that is a kind of very good communication with other teams. But I want to know the challenges now you're facing. And the third one is the third one is a little bit personal. I want to know which one corporates you prefer, because I work for the two companies.
All right, so let me see if I understood that. The sound quality isn't so great because I think the mic the sound sort of echoes in there and then it comes through the speaker. But their first question was around team fit, like where does documentation best fit in a product's team, various teams? Was that the first question?
Yeah, but actually I want to know the reality, that is the status quo of your team that is actually works now. I mean, whether your team is affiliated to the product team or you're a totally separate team in the corporate structure. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been in a lot of different teams. I did realize that being with marketing is actually not great for one main reason. Marketing focuses on the release phase of products, but technical writers need to be in the development phase of products. The only group that is really in the development phase is engineering, because they may take 6 months to build something. And that's the best time to also be developing content for the product. So I would say it's good to be in a group that has the same focus on like content development life cycles as you, not just waiting for everything as a release. You are also asking about challenges, and sorry, yeah, it was hard to hear with the microphone. I think you're asking what challenges do I kind of experience with these teams and so on. I think being in developer docs, my greatest challenge is being able to reproduce all the steps in the documentation that I'm writing. The more complex a product, the harder it is to set things up and to get things working to make sure that they work as advertised. Building some products can take hours to download and compile, and then you have to have certain conditions that will be present for things to happen. So testing everything, that's one of my personal beliefs, that it makes good docs when you can test them thoroughly yourself, but it's very challenging sometimes. Finally, I think you were asking which company I prefer, and I think I think they both have their strengths, for sure. I think it's fun to work in big tech. I think I've worked in startups and I've worked in big tech, and I like being part of companies that have products that can shape the landscape. I mean, Amazon definitely had a lot of products, and it was fun to be right next to things like Fire TV that I would use that in my own TV and so on, and it's fun to be a part of that. And Google has tons of products as well. I'm working with like Maps, and I use Google Maps all the time, and it's fun to kind of be around that. Whereas with startups, the products they're usually a lot more niche and not really relevant to my individual life. Of course, it depends on the company, but that's what I would say. Yeah, thanks.
I just want to confirm with the first question is that no matter in Amazon or in Google, your team, technical writing team, is separate from the R&D and separate from the product, separate from marketing team, right? You report to different leaders.
Yeah, so you're asking like whether the teams are separate from the research and development, or if they're like part of these other teams. Yeah, usually we are. Well, you know what? I sometimes we're sorry. I'm just thinking back of different scenarios and so many different reorgs that happen, and technical writers are sort of bounced around from one group to another. I've been in product management groups and marketing groups and engineering groups, all at Amazon, and at Google we're sort of our own group. But we work across different groups. It's like I don't know. There's no best place to be, but if you are going to be somewhere, I would say being close to engineers and close to the people who interact with users, like solutions engineers, partner engineers, that's ideal. Whether you're grouped in with them or whether you just meet with them doesn't matter so much. So yeah. Sorry if I'm misinterpreting your questions. Like I said, it's really hard for me to hear them. But
okay, thank you. Sorry, and I want to just ask more about the challenges, because whether you have been asked about what's the difference between the documents written by you and by the product team or by the R&D team, the engineers. Have you ever been asked about this question? And do you ever think about inviting or asking the R&D team to write the documents themselves?
so you're asking like how do our documents differ from documents written by other groups like engineers and so on? A lot of times an engineer will write a document and then we will edit it, address gaps, and publish it. So it's more collaborative. But in general, if only engineers write the docs, they tend to be very high level and assume that the user knows a lot more than he or she does. I mean, it's this age-old problem where engineers just assume that the audience is at their exact same technical level, when in reality it's usually not. So I always appreciate the fact that I'm not an engineer and I don't have that deep technical background. So I will ask dumb questions. I will stumble through things and hopefully illuminate problems or expose gaps in knowledge and assumptions that aren't made clear. Yeah. I mean, I have a lot more I could say about that, but it's like the value we bring as outsiders. That outside perspective is what gives so much value to docs, but it also makes it very uncomfortable to be an outsider because we're always kind of at that border of not knowing enough to really feel comfortable and having to constantly learn different things just to get by. It's just the career that we have, but yeah.
And Google has developed the courses, the technical writing courses for R&D teams. And how does it work? Do you have any idea about that?
There's a tremendous appetite from engineers to learn to write better, for sure. I think a lot of engineers are eager to learn best practices for documentation, and those courses have been working well. I wasn't part of that development. I don't really have the inside scoop on that, but for sure, there's a strong desire and interest in that, and it's great that Google makes them available online like that. So definitely check them out.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you for this very good question about collaboration between technical communication team and the other internal technical teams. And thank you for Tom sharing about his experience about how to highly engage the technical teams in the documentation creation and review processes. etc. So any other questions? We can have, over there. Not here? Yeah, as well. So, please. We can have two more questions. 请问一下，我可以用中文问吗？我是用英文。
可以的，可以。
我想问Tom 一个问题，就是因为其实 technical writer 有写很多的文档，但是有一部分文档，比如说是给一些 operation 的一些文档，比如说指导这个每一步操作怎么去进行。那如果你觉得如果一个产品 usability 不够好的话，那这部分文档你觉得是有必要的吗？因为其实现在我的业界有个说法，就是其实 UX 是如果做的足够好的话 ，technical writing 可能不是重要的东西。那么从职业发展来说，如果一个 technical writer， 他应该是更多的向前端，比如说像 UX 或者是 UI writing 上面来发展呢，还是说向后端，比如说了解更多的这个产品或者是跟 development 相关的东西来做一些 developer 的一些文章呢？这个是我其实心中一直有的一个问题。谢谢。Okay, let's try to translate a little bit. Tom, the second question for you is about the user experience and the technical operational documents, right? And our question is that if the user experience is good enough, do you think it's still needed, necessary for us to focus on the writing of the operational or instructional documentation? And we are thinking about whether we need to focus more effort to in the whole life cycle of the documentation around the design and the strategy, or move a little bit later to the user experience side. So what's your opinion?
Wow, sorry, the sound is like echoing there, and I really am getting 10% of what you're saying. I think you're asking whether a writer should focus on the writing or if they should prioritize other aspects of documentation. Was that the question? Maybe, if you could post it in the meeting chat, that would be super helpful. It's just like the speaker there, the sound doesn't travel well. Was that what you were asking? Like, what should one focus on, if like the writing matters or other aspects, or was it a different question entirely?
The question is about whether it is still necessary to focus on the writing of operational documents if the user experience of the product is already pretty good.
If the products are already pretty good, should you even focus on the writing? I'll just address what I feel about focusing on the writing. Definitely, people can get by with okay writing if there's typos or grammar errors, as long as it's accurate. It's fine. But usually at a higher level, people do expect more professional polish, and it can sort of lower the confidence that the user has about a product if things don't communicate well to them. But I've always been a champion of focusing on the content more than the style. I once was I once served as a technical editor for a team, and people would give me their documents and I would review them. But instead of just like reviewing them and proofreading them for grammar, I would try to go through the steps because that's the higher order concern, not the lower order concern. And if the steps failed me, then it doesn't matter how good the language is. That distinction between higher order concerns and lower order concerns definitely has to be apparent when you're analyzing documentation. By the way, on this last slide, if you want to go to the slides, you can just go to this link here. I'll post them on my blog as well. And I've added as well some links and various slides at the bottom for more information. And I'm happy to interact through email or chat. I'm on Slack. If you're in the Write the Docs Slack, That's I don't know if that's available there. Anyway, whatever medium you want, I'm happy to engage.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Any additional questions?
Hi, Tom. I'm Ben from Technologies. I have two questions for you. The first, I just want to know the career path of the technical writer in Google algorithm. The second, I want to know how to solve problem when you face the technical issue.
Can somebody type the questions there? Career path of a technical writer in Google and Amazon.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. The second question is how to solve the problem when such as technical issue, how to cooperate with the R&D team. Thank you.
And if you could also, somebody type the second question there as well while I answer the first. You know, the career path I don't want to single out Google and Amazon, but like in general at big tech companies, there are lots of opportunities to sort of transfer to different teams. So that's one of the huge benefits. If you, especially if you're in a cloud team, those groups have many different writers, and you can. When you have that internal flexibility to switch teams, you have more opportunities for career growth. You can maybe have a new role, or you can try a different thing. Usually, it's very difficult to get promoted at big companies. You have to really lay a case for having done remarkable things. And then the promotion usually isn't that significant monetarily in my experience. But I definitely love working at these big companies, and I know that it's pretty common for multinational companies to be big and offer many career paths. But you know, this career path question is one that's difficult because there's not a strong trajectory for a technical writer. I mean, where do you go in your career? Do you become a manager? That's sort of almost not even doing technical writing anymore. That's becoming a manager. Do you become a staff or a principal writer? What exactly does that person do that you weren't doing? I have found this is sort of an irony. In API documentation, there's a tremendous focus on being technical to get your foot in the door and to be familiar with programming languages and docs as code tools. But when you want to climb up higher in the tech writer ladder, all the skills are strategic. You know, how are you collaborating across groups to like align content initiatives, and how are you solving pain points within the developer portal? It's not really like, did you understand this code sample? It's how did you implement content strategy in some way that was that helped things, that solved big problems. So it's much more like business management thinking, I would say, almost, and leadership, being proactive and not being told what to do, but finding ways to improve the site from your own initiative. Let's see, the second one, how do you solve problems when encountering technical issues? Let me think about that one for a sec. It took me a long time to get a certain product working. It took me honestly 2 months, I think, because I didn't have the right resources and I didn't have the right information. I think the best information that I could find came from the testing teams, because they have kind of their own docs about how to test things. And if you can tap into the right people who you think might have the information and then somehow track down ways that they store and manage information, like maybe they have a list of short links or something, oftentimes you can find that information. Other times, I would have a video call with a partner engineer and we can troubleshoot and walk through issues. But it takes persistence to overcome technical issues. I think you have to have a mindset of being patient and not giving up. And once you do overcome the technical issues and you're able to get a product working and testing the API calls or however it works, I think you've conquered the product and you unlock a lot of things as a technical writer. You can suddenly answer questions for yourself. You can see whole workflows that you maybe didn't see before, and it makes the job so much easier. So it's worth it in the end to kind of overcome those hurdles. Yeah. Any other questions?
Okay, we can have one more question.
Okay.
Hi, Tom. This is Lily. Wonderful speech, and I have no question about your speech, and I just want to say thank you. And I'm a reader and a fan of your IDNB writing sites, and your Journal documentation team helped me a lot to set up the documentation site during my last job. And I love your API documentation course so much. So thanks, and keep it going, and I will be always updated. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, so no question, just like a feedback. Thanks. Yeah, just to comment on that, I have gotten so much good feedback on the API course that it's really been kind of a milestone achievement in my career. And I look at different models people have had for like getting information out. A lot of people will write a book, an ebook, and they'll sell it and so on. And I've made that course open, and it's a living document. I'm constantly adding to it because it's fun. It's like a continuous project. But I love hearing from so many people. They definitely have received much more value from that than my blog. Like the traffic on the API doc course is 3 or 4 times that of the blog, which I think reinforces the value of documentation in general. People search the web for instructional material, and they want information that teaches them how to do things. And that's what we're all engaged in. So we should feel good about what we do. I'm sure that whatever project you're working on at work, you're creating docs that are making people's lives better and happier, even if we're transparent about issues in the product, especially when we are, I think, and we should feel good about that. But thank you again for having me. I really appreciated this opportunity to kind of address this subject and meet you. And I hope to interact more with you all. So thanks again.
Thank you all for your great sharing, and thank you so much, time. And everyone in the conference room. And have a nice evening, all. You can have a look at all of us.
Thanks.
Thank you. I will talk to Ukraine, Elisa, and Monica.